Hey Enneagram friends, I'm Abby, an IA accredited Enneagram teacher and certified somatic practitioner. My work has always been an invitation for greater self-awareness and really a compassionate curiosity for the world. And I offer that invitation through corporate Enneagram workshops, private coaching, and educational resources like this podcast. In this season of the podcast, I'm inviting fellow Enneagram teachers, authors, and practitioners into the podcast space to share with you about personal growth, all through the lens of their personal type structure. In today's episode, I share a conversation with Steph Barron Hall about her experience as an Enneagram 3. Let me share with you just a little bit about Stephanie before I jump into our conversation. So Steph is a speaker, certified Enneagram coach, and author of the book Enneagram in Love, a roadmap for building and strengthening romantic relationships. Stephanie founded her Instagram page, 9 Types Co., in 2017 as a way to explore her own interest in Enneagram, and it has since grown into a community of people who are learning about the Enneagram, themselves, and their relationships together. Stephanie specializes in bringing clarity to complex concepts and communicating the Enneagram in a way that's relatable and concise so that it can be transformative for all. There are lots of gold nuggets in this conversation with Stephanie, but one of the things I really appreciate is the language she gives to the shape-shifting aspect that Enneagram Threes often find themselves in. So I hope that you will listen in with curiosity and compassion, whether you lead with Type 3 or you're in relationship with Enneagram 3s in your life, and listen in and see what resonates and lands in your experience. Steph, thank you for being here. Thanks for saying yes to being in an Enneagram space and having an Enneagram conversation with me. I'm excited to have you.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Yeah. So, when we are kind of processing through, we really want to know about you, not just all threes. I know sometimes there's this pressure to represent the whole group of people, but we want to know about your experience and what that growth has looked like through the lens of Type 3, but also through your experience. So I want to start though with just how did you land on Type 3? Did you, bounce around to some of the numbers before you landed on 3 or did you get there kind of quickly?
Yeah. Well, I have to admit that I did what I now often advise people don't do, which is I just took an online test, right? So my older sister, initially, actually, my husband was like, here's the Enneagram, check it out. And I was like, whatever, But my older sister said, oh, I think you would love this. Check it out. And I think she might be embarrassed if I say this, but she thought I was a 4, which makes a lot of sense, especially if you hadn't lived with me since high school, which was the case for her. Right. So, but she's like, here, just take this test. And it was eclectic energies. This was 2015, 2016 in that space. So, I was like, okay, took the eclectic energies assessment and it came back with the achiever. And I thought, woo, I won, amazing. And pretty soon thereafter, I started researching and reading more about it. And I was like, oh, I hate this. Because it really coincided with this observation I'd been having about myself recently, which was that even though I'd always been someone who was like, I am me, I'm myself, all that stuff, I had been noticing that actually I changed a lot, depending on who I was with and who I was around and that shape-shifting thing. And when I started reading about the Type 3 and I saw plainly on the page, the shape-shifting, I was I felt so exposed because as I'd been observing that in myself, I was like, okay, well, only I can see it. And then to see it so clearly laid out on the page, I was like, oh my gosh, people can see this.
Yeah.
And I felt mortified, which I think is something a lot of threes feel with the Enneagram.
Mm-hmm. Well, and probably all the types, right? These moments, I heard someone say once of you get Enneagrammed where it's you get punked and it's oh no, that's so true. I totally got pegged. But also how helpful that also feels though that you already had this observation of the shape shifting. Because I think sometimes, and you experience this too of, I think this is true of all the types, but especially with threes that have not observed this in themselves, just reading about it or hearing it in a workshop doesn't always cause that light bulb moment. Sometimes there's a lot of, in the threes that I've worked with, this kind of resistance to like, but I am me. And so I'm curious if you can expound on that a little bit more of like, even before the Enneagram, how did you start to notice that or even get that, maybe it was feedback or mirroring from others, but how did you start to notice that shapeshifting?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question because a lot of the time for threes, being a three works really well. We get
Yeah.
really rewarded for it. I think threes and sevens both are the ones who are most rewarded for um their like living in their passion, living in their personality. Sevens for different reasons, I think. Threes because we're rewarded externally and we're like, yeah, amazing, duh. Why would I not want that?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think a lot of it is that so just trauma, to be honest. Like I just encountered some really difficult challenges when I was like in my late teens. And it really sent me on like soul searching. Like,
Mm,
why does this impact me this way? Why does no one else get it? Like, what is different about me? Why am I thinking about it in this manner? um, Really asking those questions and digging really deep into that. And it just like I do think in a lot of ways my personality changed. Not to say like my motivation changed or I was once a different type and now I'm this type. It more so the way I showed up in the world and how I thought the world was really
mm,
changed. Um, and so and I consistently ended up just putting myself in places where I had to shapeshift to fit in.
mm.
I think that was just like by happenstance, but I would put myself into, for example, like a faith community that I deep down did not believe in and
Yeah.
still was able to perform there. And so I think that um, the lack of alignment with that um, felt really uncomfortable. And so I was able to kind of stay busy and hustle to avoid that. But ultimately, I think it became a thing that as I encountered challenges, I recognized that that wasn't helping me.
Yeah.
And I would also say that this was a big part of it when I was like in my early 20s. I was a manager over like a over a dozen people on my staff. And in that type of role, you get a lot of feedback on who you are, how you show up, how you impact people. And that also sent me on a path of soul searching because it made me realize, like, wow, I am having a different impact than I want to on people. And why is that?
Mm, yeah.
So that was a long winded way to say there are a lot of different reasons. And I think
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess I always think I'm just the same as everyone else, right? Like I think that's part of the thing with the three, but maybe that's an area where I think I approach things a bit differently.
Yeah, for sure. So, pulling that into like your current context now, um, how do you know when you're in alignment with yourself? How do you, like, can you tell maybe the adverse is like, I can tell that I'm shape shifting, or I can tell that this feels true to me? How do you know?
Oh, that's just the age old question, right? um, I think, as I've been doing this work, I was, one of my teachers recently mentioned that emotional work comes before identity work.
Hmm.
And for me, I think the emotional work was the most glaringly obvious thing because even though I am fairly emotional and I always have been and very sensitive and always have been, for years, I just tamped that down
Yeah.
with being tough and being like hard as nails or whatever I needed to be. Right. Um, and I had a moment when I first was studying the Enneagram where I was like, oh, wait, I, something's happening. What is happening here? And I was like, oh, that's an emotion. So let's dig in a little. Let's figure out what's happening with that. And I think that recognizing that was really important for me. And so it's been years now of emotional work. And I think starting into the identity piece of what does feel aligned, what does feel good? What feels like a life that I want to live, not one that other people want me to live? It's in process, you know?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's, the common thread that shows up in basically every interview that I do with practitioners is like, and it's in process. Like you don't arrive. It is always unfolding, and there's always new seasons and new people that come in and out, and new awareness and discoveries. So, yeah, we're all in process. I love that you named that emotion piece. And I'm a somatic practitioner, and so there is a lot of awareness of emotion through the felt sense. And yeah, I think as I work with threes, I think whether you use different language for it or not, the sense of alignment that you can tell, like, it just shows up in your system of like, I feel good, I feel known, I feel welcomed, I feel like I belong, or that spacious feeling that shows up. And letting that be true information, even though it's coming internally and not coming externally from the feedback that you're getting in your surroundings.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, recognizing so much of the softness.
Yeah.
And when I talk about that, people are like, oh, that's not three. Which is funny, but I've been on this long process. And I'm not sure if this is one of your questions, so I'll go ahead and dive in and we'll see. But several years ago, okay, here's the other thing. I love a test. When I was in school, I loved tests. I loved standardized tests. I did academic decathlon, which is basically doing tests for fun. Like I've always loved that. So when it comes to personality, anything, I'm like, yes, I'm going to take the test. I don't care. It's, I can hold the results loosely, but I'm going to take the test. So I've taken all of the assessments like a bazillion times probably. But a few years ago when I first took the IEQ 9, it popped up that I was a self-preservation 3. And at the time, I had read the complete Enneagram, but I think that's a book that you have to be a little further along in your journey to really digest. And so I read the description in the IEQ 9 report, and I also read from the Wisdom of the Enneagram, and I was like, I guess, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Like I can see that. But throughout my journey, I was like, I think that doesn't quite fit, because most of the self-pres threes I meet are much more like stoic, and they're more put together, honestly.
They have a lot of a lot of one qualities that show up in that self-pres 3.
Right. They have a lot of their everything together. And I was like, I love that for you. That's not my story. And so then for a second I was like, okay, I think I'm a social 3, because that seems like it makes the most sense. Like I do all this stuff on social media, but I do less than I probably would if I weren't so afraid of imperfection, and I want to show up polished and doubling down on image. That seems to make sense for me. So I must be a social 3, but I just really did not relate to the part about it being really flashy or being really like, I've just never been somebody who has like an abundance of self-confidence. That has been hard one in my life. Like I have struggled a lot with lack of confidence and feeling really insecure. And now that I'm in my 30s, I feel like I'm coming around to myself, but it's not always been my story. So then let's see, it wasn't even that long ago, maybe 6 months ago, 8 months ago. I'm in this book group with other people from my Enneagram school. And they were like, so why do you think you're social again? And I started to explain it. I was like, I don't know. I don't know why. And I realized that I had never really looked at the sexual 3. And when I did, I was like, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. Again, one, people can see me. Right? But 2, I don't want to be that. I don't want to be soft. I don't want to be shy or gentle or insecure. I don't want to merge with other people so strongly. I don't want to merge with my own self-deceit image, so strongly. I don't want to be so like addicted to like the chemistry aspect of relationships. Like I don't want any of that. But I think that's because it is so true.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to see it. And so I think that's also a big part of like my journey with it, of recognizing the level of emotionality that I have might be, I mean, threes are center of the heart center, right? And we just deny that, but also there might be that other layer to it with the sexual three being a little bit more emotional.
Yeah, for sure. So now that you've come to that awareness, because I think, there's so many layers, right? There's so many layers of our type, whether that is giving more language to, a different facet, or even discovering our subtype, or even switching our stacking around. Like sometimes I feel like I have so much wisdom out of knowing what my blind instinct is, even more than what my dominant instincts, right? Like there's so many pieces, but having that awareness now, are there aspects of it that you feel like you are now mindful of in a new way, whether that is like to appreciate, or even realizing like, oh, there's a lot of reactivity in that, and so I want to be mindful to balance that out. Any kind of new growing edges or things you're celebrating out of that awareness?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's made me a lot more aware of how I can very easily like sense something in somebody else, and I can instantly know like how to charm them. And like I made this analogy the other day, like I can bring them into my web, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that can be a really good thing if you are using it for good, right? To like champion somebody, or to encourage them, or to help them to see like their own strengths. I feel like that's something I'm really good at, is like with my coaching clients, especially being like, you have this incredible strength that I like really want you to be able to see, and really to be able to resonate with them in that. And I think when I do typing interviews, especially, that can be really vulnerable, and it's often a one-off event. So people come in and they think, oh my God, this is going to suck. I am going to feel awful about it, et cetera, et cetera. And like every single time people are like, this was so much different than I thought. Like, you're so kind. And like, I felt so heard, and I really felt like you understood me. And like, so that I feel like is really a gift of it.
Yeah.
And also sometimes it's something I have to be aware of, because if I'm not aware of that and I'm just out in the world doing that, one, I have no energetic boundaries whatsoever. So that's not good. That leaves me feeling exhausted. But two, I end up with people's numbers and I don't want it, you know? Or like, and I think there's like a subconscious aspect to that, right? Where I'm like, why do people always do this to me? And then I'm like, oh no, I think I'm sending that energy, without being aware of it. So it requires a lot more awareness.
Yeah, for sure. When I love the, even the like, why do I have everyone's numbers? I hear that sentiment not even just from the sexual or one-to-one subtype 3, but from all of them, the sense of like people mistake that I'm like flirting, or that I'm trying to like, like buddy, and I'm like, I wasn't. I was just interested in the conversation we were having, and then I was planning on walking away. But the sense of like, it's that broadcasting piece of the sexual subtype that, like, here I am, and like if I can laser beam you in, or if I can web you in to interaction, then we can have an interesting conversation or an emotional conversation, and then we can leave. Like, we don't have to keep doing that thing. So I love that you shared that. So how did, as we think about, the subtype of sexual 3 with, or sorry, the subtype of sexual with the 3, I think one of the biggest contradictions that I often experience with people is the emotion piece. And it feels like, oh, now that makes sense, because, we talk about that type 3 structure, this sense of not having an easy access to understand their feelings, or to know how to emote them in real time. But it sounds like that piece, has that always been something that you're more keyed into, or was there still a learning edge because you're still a 3 at the end of the day?
Yeah, definitely still a learning edge. And to this day, like I sometimes joke about it, like with a coach or a therapist, they'll be like, "How are you doing?" And I'm like, hadn't thought about it. Shocked you asked that question. Like, because it's like, obviously that's gonna be a question, but I think I have a bit of a difficult time in the moment, like
Mm-hmm.
being really present and really connecting with myself. Like I could tell you overarching in my life how I'm doing and how things are going. Um, but normally that focus is really in almost like a one-ish way on things that I need to fix and things that aren't ideal and things that I want to like optimize. And I think when I am coming from that energy, I end up being really frantic a lot of the
Mm,
time. Um, and like I think, I end up wanting to do way more than I can ever possibly do, right? Like
mm.
classic 3. Um, and like right now I have up on my other monitor my to-do list and it's like laughing in my face as I speak. Um, but I think the contact with emotion has been difficult because I am really aware that I cannot just tamp it down and set it aside and do the type of work that I do now. When
Yeah.
I did other types of jobs, I could, right? Especially when I had a job where um, I was always on my feet and I was like managing stuff and managing people. Yeah, that emotion came out in unpleasant ways at times.
Mm,
But um, I also think that the emotion was not like conscious.
yeah.
But now I do a lot of creative work. I do a lot of writing. I do a lot of coaching. And it just sucks if you are not emotionally aware and if you're not dealing with stuff. And so I think now the challenge is not so much being aware of it or accepting it, like for better or for worse, it's there.
Mhm.
It's the challenge is really how do I like process all of
Yeah.
it? Um, and like honor myself in doing that. Because yeah, maybe I could get more done if I were more of a robot, but I'm not. And that
Hmm.
doesn't actually help anyone.
Yeah. And it's also a good thing that you're not a robot and that you're a human, right? Not just like, oh, okay, I got to make peace with the fact that I'm human, but it's a good thing.
I'm not convinced,
Yeah.
but okay.
When you had even as you're talking through it, the sense of processing emotion was the language that you use. So now having more awareness around how you're feeling, like what is the language I use is metabolize emotion. Like it's not that we're intellectually always thinking or figuring out our emotion, but it's like we got to let it move through our system so that it doesn't just get shoved down or become this raw, emotion in our subconscious that we haven't dealt with. And so what's your process or metabolizing emotion look like for you?
Yeah, I use that word a lot too when I think about it. Um, so right now, honestly, like in small moments, it's just like putting my hand on my heart and like taking a deep breath and just seeing what's coming up.
Yeah.
Um, and returning to the fact of like, what do I feel like I need to do or be, or who do I feel like I need to do or be? Um, not who do I feel like I need to do, but who do I feel like I need
You're
to
okay.
be? Um, but versus like what's actually true. And then, so I would say that's one of the ways that I do that throughout the day. Um, and also identifying if I am looking for more input, like because I love to read audiobooks, podcasts, if I'm looking for input so that I can ignore what I'm feeling versus if I'm actually interested in something.
Mm.
Um, and then I just in general, like journaling, meditation, um, I have specific books that I'll like read a small portion of. So not enough to like turn my brain on, but enough to where I can like sit with that. Um, walking, like being outside, um, meeting with my coaches,
Mm-hmm.
all of these different kind of tools to bring in more awareness or to kind of like let things go. Because I think if I'm not journaling, for example, it ends up all getting just like held, like all of the emotion is just like in my chest.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it doesn't even have to be like a big thing that I feel like I need to journal about, right? It
Yeah.
doesn't even have to be anything. And this is actually one of the things that I talk about a lot, which is some research by the psychologist James Pennebaker, who um, he has done a lot of research around like processing emotions through like writing and like emotional expression through writing. And the value of that. And so I do try to journal. I don't do it probably as much as I need to, but like I don't do it every day, but I think that's like one of the ways.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I'm also trying to experiment with like getting more into some different like types of body work and things like that. Um, that will be supportive as well because I think the body center is the center I go to last.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. When I love that you named so many different types of things. I mean, I feel like even just the language of like we have so many resources, like so many things that are available to us, and like you just named a dozen. So I think sometimes we get to this place where we feel really stuck, and it's like, okay, we'll just start trying some things, right? Especially if you are not at a season where you can sit with a practitioner and get some individualized support, just start trying some things. And I think even as you list off some of these pieces, there are tools in that toolkit that you just offered that are really helpful in slowing us down enough to just have a sense that something's off. Even if we don't have a incredibly vibrant emotional intelligence language, like, the whole chart's not memorized for us, just slowing down enough by taking a walk or by journaling or sitting with a pet or staring at the window with a cup of coffee, like some of those things that are just helpful to slow us down. And especially as a three, like out of that doing, the like doing dominance and the like thinking about the doing, really into like, what is it that I am experiencing, what's showing up for me, and how do I get more in touch with that. Yeah, and I also love that you're, moving towards that body-based somatic journey. I feel like, I came into my work very much through the Enneagram, but my training is through the narrative Enneagram that, combines the Enneagram awareness with somatic awareness. And now the two feel inseparable. Like it feels like they just come up so much together and in tandem. So I love that is part of where your journey is taking you.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned a lot of different pieces, not just with your experience, but then things that come up in your coaching. And then I realized I didn't even ask, like, how did you come into coaching and teaching and workshops and being an author? Like, how did this work find you?
Oh gosh. Yeah. So I've always loved personality, anything. Like a lot of us, I when I was in college, I studied psychology. And I remember really being excited about the concept of using personality type systems in working with teams and like team building. And actually one of my first jobs out of college, I got to do that, which was really fun. But with the Enneagram, really, I had a full-time job and I had a different business. And then I was getting really exhausted with that business. It was like in the wedding industry. So I was just really like burning myself out. And I was like, okay, like, I need to do something else. So I kind of like phased that out, and then I was a little bored. So I heard on a podcast, like about somebody who created coffee mugs for different personality types. And I was like, oh, that sounds fun. I could do that. So I hired a designer, and at the time I was working in e-commerce merchandising, which is totally different from what I do now, obviously, because that's like data analysis essentially. And my husband also was working in like physical products, in marketing. So we're like, we could totally do this. So we hired a designer. We created coffee mugs for each of the types, and then sold them for our first like holiday season, like our first like Christmas season. So that was over 5 years ago now. And that's like where Nine Types Co started. People always ask, like, why did you choose that name? And I was like, I think I just didn't want it to say Enneagram, honestly. So then the following year, people started asking me like, oh, can you come teach our group? Can you come teach our team? Can you come talk about it in this space? And so I was like, sure. So I started doing that. Then people started asking, oh, where's your certification from? And I was like, oh, I don't have one of those. So, mostly because all of them, like I'm sure you remember at the time, like Narrative Enneagram, like they're all in person, right? Mm-hmm. So I am in California, so a lot of them were close enough, but I didn't have all the PTO to be able to travel and do that. Mm-hmm. So there was one online at the time, which was called Your Enneagram Coach. So I did that certification. And then I was like, okay, if I really want to do this, I need to get more education probably. So then I got a master's degree in organizational communication and leadership. And so paired those two things together. And then I don't know if you remember, but in 2018, Sarah Jane Case of Enneagram and Coffee, she's put out her like bingo cards.
I don't think I remember that.
Okay, so she had these bingo cards and they just started going viral. Okay. And I like on Instagram. Mm-hmm. And I had already been posting on Instagram a bit at the time. And what happened though is people started loving the Enneagram. And so as her stuff grew, other Enneagram pages started growing because, you know, if the market grows, even if you have the same amount of market share, like you have more people. So, mm-hmm. Things kind of started to take off. And I just kind of kept doing my Instagram. I wasn't really doing a lot of coaching or a lot of typing interviews even. I just find that that's so sacred. And if you don't have enough training, and I really don't appreciate the idea where people are like, fake it till you make it. Just like call yourself a coach and go be a coach. Like, not a fan. So I think that it's really important to get more training. And so I wasn't doing a lot of that, but I was growing my Instagram audience and stuff. And I started teaching some workshops here and there. And then basically summer 2019 took that full time. And it's just like expanded from there. It's been kind of a wild ride because when I actually think about it, like the amount of between January 2019 and January 2020, I went from like around 1,000 followers on Instagram to over 100,000.
Oh my goodness.
Which was its own sort of interesting thing. But yeah, that's kind of how I grew that. And then I'm also certified or accredited with IEQ9 and finishing up with Chestnut Pie's Enneagram Academy as well. So, which that process takes like 2 years. So,
mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah. No, and I love to, there's so many things that you said in there that I think are just so fascinating. One, I'm sure you have these moments when you think like this all started with coffee mugs, right? Like, I mean, that just is, it's so crazy when you hear some of the origin stories of where people started. It's like, it started with like one thing and now where it has evolved into. And so I love that evolution, and I love there was probably so many moments where you just kept saying yes to the next thing, even when it didn't feel like you were fully qualified or ready or had the space, but you figured out how to say yes. But I also love, even hearing the evolution of learning and the teachers that you can you continue to sit with, and I think it's just, I'm always amazed, especially now going through all these conversations with different practitioners. I mean, you just never stop learning. Like, in addition to the fact that you never stop evolving in personal work and inner work, there's also the sense of like you're always a student, and I think the best teachers and authors and coaches, like, they're also being taught and coached, and they have people that they're gleaming wisdom from, and they're being curious with, and I love hearing even just that of like, and in this current season, I'm still learning, and this is what I'm doing, and I also love Beatrice Chestnut's work, so I specifically love that's what you're doing. That's, I know that we could like talk forever, and we've only talked about one type, but how can people be connected to the work that you're doing now in this season? Where can they find you? But then also, like, what are the things that you're currently up to that they can partner into or invite you to come into their space to do?
Yeah. So I have a few different avenues. One is that I do have an online course where people can just learn more deeply about the Enneagram. I find that, and it's not just Enneagram learning, it's actually like tools and resources. Like when I told you earlier about all the different, things that I explore for my own work, I have those for each type, on how to learn and grow and access different parts of yourself. Mostly because I just find that that's like a big gap. A lot of the time, even, you look at in books, they don't always tell you, okay, this is what you do with this information.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just really wanted practical ways for people to do that, to kind of tackle some of those activities. So that course is called Enneagram IRL. It's at enneagramirl.com. And yeah, you can sign up, check it out. People can grab all 9 types or just their own. And then I also do one-on-one coaching. I especially like to coach people alongside the course because I find that's really useful.
Mm-hmm.
But I do one-on-one coaching, whether that's, you're trying to understand, a current transition phase or anything like that. So you can find that on my website, which is 9types.co. I have my own podcast, which is called Enneagram IRL. And you can also find me very soon. I'm like, why am I doing all the different things? But I am, because
You're okay.
I have limited availability, though. I will say that when it comes to teams and organizations, but I do a lot of that work too, because I find that having a background with the organizational communication aspect is a little bit different than a lot of the Enneagram stuff I see out there, because they don't have as much of the OD aspect to it. So blending that with the Enneagram is useful. And people can find that on my website too. And then finally, I am in the throes of writing a new book.
Okay.
So I am working on that. And yeah, so keeping busy, but it's fun.
Yeah. Are you able to share what the new book, what the topic, the theme, lenses?
Yeah, so it'll be kind of like what I was mentioning too about my course, like a little bit more like looking at how can we make this practical? Like, how can we really use this? So taking a lot of the theories that we love to explore and then delving in a little bit more to, okay, like let's figure out how to actually apply this in your life so that you can grow.
Awesome. Okay. Well, very good. Well, and I will link your Instagram account and your website in the show notes so people can find it easily. So thank you for giving a rundown of some of the things. You were busy. Not that I'm surprised, but you got a lot going on. So, well, thank you again for sharing. And I know, I've gotten a lot of really positive feedback from this series of just how articulate an Enneagram teacher can be about the type when it's not just, knowledge of a type, but it's also that personal experience. And so thank you for being willing to share and process and ruminate on even some of the parts that feel very in progress and not all nice and neat with a pretty bow. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Hey, Enneagram friends. Thanks again for listening into my conversation with Steph Barron Hall. I hope that you are walking away with a wealth of information, but also just a better sense of how to move forward in your personal growth if you lead with type 3. If you found this episode helpful, would you do me a favor and share it with a friend and subscribe to the podcast so that you could hear the rest of the episodes this season? That's a great way to share this resource and to grow the community and the conversations around the Enneagram. Okay, friends, until next time.